Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. Today, I would like to talk about the mayor of Charlottesville, the attorney general, that would be Mark Herring the Red, the little red rat down in Richmond, and the hypocrisy of recent concerns over the University of Virginia. Let's go back a little ways to what happened at Liberty University just a few months ago. The headline story today in the daily newspaper, Walker, UVA plan a recipe for disaster, by Nolan Stout and Catherine Knott, has some very interesting dichotomies within. And we need to read between the lines in these stories because, a lot of times people just see a headline, they assume everything's okay, and they go on with their lives. Charlottesville Mayor Nikuyah Walker on Monday called the University of Virginia's plan to allow students on grounds and have in-person classes, quote, a recipe for disaster. This was at a virtual press conference. Again, I think these are tightly regulated by the city, and for a reason. They don't really want a lot of people asking questions. Walker's comments came as local government, health, and K-12 schools officials are starting to sound the alarm over possible negative repercussions of bringing college students back to the area. There are negative repercussions of anything happening, anything that's a change. There are negative repercussions of the students not coming back to the area. But where were all of their concerns over the excess drinking, the fighting, the carousing, and all the problems that the college students bring, including diseases that happened before this pandemic? Of course, we had problems with the flu and other sorts of communicable diseases that have been ongoing. In the press conference, the story tells us that Mayor Walker mentioned officials have received reports of house parties and other large gatherings. I've got to ask you, have we been having parties and large gatherings in neighborhoods around Charlottesville not related to the college students? I'll bet you we have, because there's a story right below here in the daily newspaper by Nolan Stout. City officials discuss possible return to phase 2. And there's a quote-unquote victim by the name of Stacy Washington. And this story is fascinating because of the facts that are omitted here or not fleshed out. Stacy Washington took a chance on the 4th of July weekend. Yes, the coronavirus pandemic was still limiting everyday life, but her birthday was July 6th. And so she thought it would be fine to go without a face mask for a celebration in the backyard. I wonder how many people were there. Was this a large gathering? Have they been doing contact tracing? Boy, was I wrong, she said. And of course, she was included in the mayor's press conference. A couple of days later, I woke up out of my sleep and I could not breathe. Washington's spouse had to catch her before she collapsed from breathing difficulties. Sure enough, she tested positive for the virus. What's wrong with this picture? Well, if it was just a couple of days later, that wasn't long enough for the actual virus to have developed in 2 days and to bring the symptoms. In many cases, it's up to 14 days. In a lot of cases, it's at least 5 to 6 days before you start being symptomatic. So how is it that the daily newspaper, in reporting all of this, could not ask the question, why in this particular patient, and we're very sorry for Stacy Washington and what she suffered through, but why was it for this particular patient that a couple of days later we could have the most severe symptoms possible? Is it possible, even probable, that Stacy Washington contracted this somewhere else? And by the way, was there a large party going on, a large gathering of people that the mayor was not aware of here in Charlottesville where this took place, even if it wasn't where Stacy Washington contracted the virus? Inquiring minds want to know. The mayor continues in this story. I, for one, do not understand why the students are coming back into the community from all over the globe and why we would take that chance. Let's stop right there. All over the globe is right. And yet the president tried to limit that in some recent directive that he was put out. And what happened when the president said, hey, if you're here and you're just doing classes online and you're from around the globe, we want to revoke your visas. Immediately, the story in the daily newspaper, actually also in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, tells us that Virginia is among a group of states suing the Trump administration over a new rule that says international students in the U.S. must leave the country or risk deportation if their colleges hold completely virtual classes this fall. So the mayor is saying, why would we take the risk? The president's saying the same thing, although the mayor would not and did not credit the president for his position. But what happened? Attorneys general, including that little red rat Mark Herring here in Virginia, filed a lawsuit on Monday in Massachusetts federal court against the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, which oversees the student visas. So he's trying to overturn it, saying, well, this is, as they always say between the lines, if not overtly, this is racist. They criticized what they called the federal government's cruel, abrupt, and unlawful action to expel international students amidst the pandemic that has wrought death and disruption across the United States. So you just can't win as the Trump administration, and the mayor apparently agree on this. We don't want people coming back to this community from all places across the globe. It's dangerous. What are we thinking? What are we thinking indeed? And lest we try to look at even a deeper look at all of this, I want to go back to a story here that appeared broadly around the end of March. And this one here coming from TV 13, the ABC affiliate. Northam, that would be Wretched Ralph, our governor, urges Liberty University to reconsider allowing students to return to campus. The daily press conference addressing the spread of COVID-19, the story tells us the governor, Wretched Ralph Northam, mentioned hundreds of students being allowed to return to Liberty University. Now, what's problematic about that? What is hypocritical about that? I would suggest President Falwell look to the actions of the leaders of Virginia's flagship universities for how to set a strong example in this health crisis, and please reconsider his message that invites and encourages students to return to campus. Do you not remember that a lot of these students were international students and they had nowhere else to go? And yet the governor was encouraging them to get the hell out of Dodge. Back in March, he was excoriating Jerry Falwell in the national media for allowing these students to stay when they had nowhere else to go. Mark Herring is saying, hey, this is a terrible thing. And yet the mayor of this community is saying, why would we let them come to the University of Virginia? Well, that's a very good question. Maybe it has something to do with the university's ties to communist China, and that a good number of these students would be Chinese students, and therefore that's money in the university's pocket. Just speculation here. We don't have any direct ties, but we can certainly surmise. Last month, the university president, that would be Diamond Jim Ryan, he said the classes are going to start on August 25th. So they've already made a commitment here. Going to have reduced class sizes, some lectures online, daily symptom checks, no fall break. So they'll end instruction by Thanksgiving, and then people come back again after January 1st. So it looks like they're taking at least reasonable steps at the University of Virginia. Their spokesperson says on advice of medical and public health experts, as well as state and federal health regulations that the university will be following. This is according to Brian Coy. The University of Virginia is preparing to bring back students in a way that reflects the advice of medical and public health experts, as well as state and federal regulations, according to Brian Coy, the UVA spokesperson. He said later this week that UVA will release a broad health and safety plan to prevent the spread of the virus. Well, you know and I know that whatever they do on grounds is not going to be monitored off grounds, but that is really the nature of being human, right? We're not monitored 24/7 by a university or an employer mostly, or generally speaking. I mean, there may be some exceptions here. Brian Coy says public health is the university's highest concern, and the plan we finalize reflects that commitment. Questions that were directed to Coy weren't answered when asked if UVA is considering changing fall plans and how UVA will monitor students off grounds. This is a question. Are we going to put monitoring devices on the students at the University of Virginia now to please the local city government? Highly unlikely. Our mayor said that the incoming students, this influx taking place in August, and the departure at the end of the semester would create health risks for the city. What about the activities of people within the city creating health risks for the university? I'm sure they do have some concerns, particularly the sorts of parties that we described just a few minutes ago with Stacey Washington coming down with coronavirus through some risky practice. It's a recipe for disaster, the mayor said. It's going to leave us all in the lurch in August when they come and in November when they leave, and we'll be left cleaning up the fallout from that decision. Well, all of us are left cleaning up the fallout from the decisions of the city and the decisions of the governor in shutting these businesses down. And now, of course, the city's talking about going back to phase 2 restrictions, further damaging the businesses and the livelihoods of city residents. Albemarle County School Board member Kate Acuff, she's worried about UVA students. You see, they get coordinated on their talking points, hoping to pressure the university into a cancellation. She's worried, Kate Acuff, about the UVA students returning to Charlottesville, echoing a concern raised during public comment at the board meeting. That would be the Albemarle County School Board. Just fascinating, isn't it? They're all on the same page. This is called CYA. I've already seen them out and about and without masks, so I'm somewhat concerned about that, she said. If they do come back, this is Kate Acuff, and there is an outbreak, it would probably be October-ish before it would show up. I assume we're making plans in some way, and that's all I need to know. Okay, she's saying let's be prepared for this, and then I guess we can go on, kind of straddling the fence. For now, we go to our friend Jennifer McKeever of the Charlottesville City School Board. In any given moment after the UVA students come back into our town, the local numbers are going to be really different than they are right now, said Jennifer McKeever, the chairwoman of the City School Board. And I just want to make sure that we are 100% prepared for that potential worst-case scenario. Nobody ever told Jennifer McKeever or any of the other COVID Karens, and while I appreciate the concern that you cannot be 100% prepared for anything, life and the things that surround us change constantly, going to places that we never envisioned. And if we could be 100% prepared for anything, I'm sure we would, but we can't. It's not the way of the world, Jennifer McKeever. Finally, Mayor Walker emphasized during this press conference that the city has no authority over UVA, and ain't that the truth? Having been there and done that during my time on city council all those years ago, whenever it came to butting heads with the university always won. And while the city can try to embarrass and shame the university, the county can do the same thing. The university is going to do what the university is going to do. You remember what happened when the numbers came out at the University of Virginia Hospital about the millions, what was it, $90 million they were losing? And all of a sudden, the governor of Virginia, wretched Ralph Northam, rolled over. You cannot anticipate that the University of Virginia is going to capitulate to anything that the city or the county demands of them. The mayor's comment, we can't do anything other than to implore the university to make a different decision. Well, that's highly unlikely to happen, and the university will make their decision, again, based ultimately on money. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast returns in just a moment.
Associated Press award-winning journalist Rob Schilling.
BorderHawk.News is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The Border Hawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.News highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. Border Hawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Schilling Show Unleashed.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and we welcome to the program Karen Kataline, commentator, columnist, talk show host, and many other things she does that are so important. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about masking the truth about masks, an excellent piece that Karen's written. Hey, Karen, welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed.
It is great to talk to you, Rob. Thanks for having me.
I want to start out with something very important, because this line between personal freedom, which we used to take for granted here in this country because it is guaranteed to us, and the state dictates for personal behavior. You talk about how this line has not only been crossed, but it's just been trampled on and exceeded.
It's stunning to me how quickly it all happened. 1 minute, this was America, and the next minute, governors thought that they could tell us what to put on our face, whether we could go out of our house, and you know the list. Your listeners know the list. The problem is that people were scared into compliance, and they're still being scared into compliance. And the problem, again, is that authoritarianism, unchecked, breeds more authoritarianism. Does anybody think that they're going to stop with the forced use of masks? Of course they're not. Pretty soon it'll be turn around 3 times before you enter a store and raise your left hand and pledge allegiance to your dear leader. I mean, there's no end to what they can do if you allow them once they've crossed that line, which they clearly have.
You know, Karen, I, along with a local business owner, got an attorney and sued the governor of Virginia about his mask dictate, believing it to be unconstitutional and unlawful. And yet we have a lot of trouble in the courts with judges who seem to be ruling on the basis of emotion rather than constitutionality. So when we have that sort of corruption, it makes it very difficult for people to pursue a legal avenue against these unlawful dictates.
And Rob, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to recognize that they're going for broke now for a host of reasons. All of these things are related and connected. Again, you don't have to be wearing a black helicopter hat, beanie, or a tinfoil hat, as they say, to realize that they waited until, and this is decades in the making, of infiltrating the courts with activist judges. Even the Supreme Court is not reliably constitutional right now, although they come and go. They've infiltrated the media writ large. They've infiltrated education. And this is what happens when under our noses we have avowed and secret socialists who really just hate this country. Frankly, and the other reason they're going for broke is because it's an election year. And Donald Trump stands in the way of everything they want, which is globalist, one world, socialism / communism, which are only about 5 years apart. And about the only thing we have left is our quote, just keep saying, I will not comply. And if enough people say that, I will not comply. This is not America, and this is not constitutional. And until enough people say that, they're going to keep doing it. And that's why I like to quote Gandhi, which I did in my piece, 100,000 Englishmen. Well, it's the quote of Gandhi in the movie, which I recommend everybody see because it's a treatise on nonviolent civil disobedience. He said 100,000 Englishmen cannot control 350 million Indians if those Indians refuse to cooperate.
There's a lesson there. We're talking with Karen Kataline, and we're unmasking the mask edicts and the truth about masks. It's really unbelievable what's going on in America today. I want to go to the problem, one of the fundamental problems here that you reference, and why is it? What has happened to Americans that we believe these edicts and we're instantly trusting of the so-called experts?
I think it's been a long time coming. It's been the loosening of not only education and leaving out information that we used to be taught in civics class, which they don't. So it's a matter of ignoring the true principles in America, but also indoctrination of a nature that makes them hate. The paradox, among the many things I've done in my checkered past is that I got an MSW from Columbia University, and the psychology of this is what really gets me the most. The psychology of masks and causing people to further be submissive, to look down at their feet, to be scared of their fellow citizens and suspicious, introducing the idea of snitching on your neighbor for not following stupid laws. And to get back to your question, I think they've elevated the idea that if something rises to national prominence and some expert or scientist says it, it must be true. And frankly, my best analogy, even though it's not exact, I talked to a deprogrammer yesterday who says, no, it's not a cult. But you know what? Leftism is a cult. Mm-hmm. I have looked at cults. I have looked at the psychology of cults, and there are so many frightening and similar similarities, such as hating and demonizing people who disagree with the ideology of the cult, secretivism, playing on people's vulnerabilities and fears, whatever your weakness, whatever is your weakest part of you, that's what a cult will play on. Just like gangs, you need a family, the cult will give you a family. You need recognition, they'll massage your ego. And it's all exploitation. So, to get people out of cults, you really have to make an emotional argument, not an intellectual argument, because they're not part of that cult because of an intellectual argument. They're part of the cult because it's serving an emotional need. One more sentence, forgive me. You wind me up and I just go. And that is the thing that I have discovered, and I'm not good at it because mostly when people are gullible and they're infringing on my freedom by using the government as a proxy and telling me what to do, I get angry. And so I like to tell other people how to do it, but I sometimes can't control my passion as far as just wanting to yell at them and strangle them. And so I don't do that. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't strangle anybody. Mm-hmm. But the best thing you can do, I've had great debates on the radio, but the best thing you can do is get them to ask that first question. And one question leads to another question. And then when they see how the cult treats them, when they ask that question, then you're on a roll.
Karen, you mentioned something really interesting, and you used the word snitch, and I love that you used it. It's not a word that we were using a lot in this generation, but it was previously very common. And so the governor here in Virginia has set up an anonymous snitch line where people can call in or write in and snitch on businesses, on churches, on individuals who are not complying, and sick government agents on these entities. In addition, I have seen on the social media site Nextdoor, of all places, Nextdoor, where people are posting up about businesses they walked into. Instead of saying, hey, I'm not doing business there, it's turn them in, call them up, shame them on social media, and shut them down. What is within people that needs to be fed with this sort of vileness?
Such a great question, the way that you phrased it. Well, first, we know there's nothing new under the sun. Right. This is straight out of the old Soviet Union, where people whispered behind closed doors what they really thought because there were snitches everywhere. I mean, this is truly to quote our despicable previous president.
Yes,
we're watching a fundamental transformation in our country from liberty to tyranny. And the culture is more powerful sometimes than the law, because if you're being bullied by mobs of people that break down your iron gate in St. Louis, and then you have a planted leftist who says, well, if you defended yourself, you're the criminal. I mean, this is twisted and insane, and that's what we're watching. The psychology of being willing to snitch on your neighbor really, in my opinion, is the final culmination of a person who's bought into the cult. And the cult is clearly giving them a sense of superiority, a sense of importance. If nothing else, leftism appeals to people who are narcissistic and insecure. They need the support of the social pressure. And if it isn't, they've already experienced the social pressure, right? And they've buckled under to the social pressure. So it's a matter of really making others pay for what they did. A lot of projection, and it's straight out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, that you accuse others of what you're doing. I mean, it's no accident that the left began a lot of this by claiming they were the tolerant ones. They were the diverse ones. They just wanted to get rid of hatred and bigotry. And now people are beginning to see that they are the absolute biggest racists, the biggest bigots. They are full of hate. They are full of everything they accuse us of. And unfortunately, a lot of conservatives and other liberty-loving people are kind and a little too polite, and they're afraid to call them what they are, which is they're the racists.
It's very true. We're talking with Karen Kataline, and we're talking about masks and what's really going on behind all of this. So I want to use a term that you used in the excellent article that you put together, Karen, and it was this problem with a lack of lawful lawmakers. I was elected to office here in Charlottesville, Virginia, some years ago, and I had to take an oath to the Constitution. I did not cross my fingers behind my back when I took it, and yet I think there's a lot of people in America today, just like you mentioned, the courts having problems, who are elected to office who do not uphold the Constitution, probably the vast majority.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in that line that people appreciated, and I'm glad they did, not only, yes, there are lawless lawmakers, and ironically, but not so coincidentally, they are imposing on us lawless laws, and they're refusing to enforce lawful laws, all at the same time. This is a dismantling of America before our very eyes. It is nothing less than that. And what is disturbing is that people keep applying the old rules to a new situation. I know that's not exactly what you asked. What you asked is, how did these lawless lawmakers get there? Or that there are so many people who are divorcing themselves from the oath that they took of office, like you did. Even, I don't know if you know, but I'm in Colorado.
Yes.
I did live on the East Coast. I lived in Los Angeles as an actress and singer, and so I've lived in a lot of these big cities. And I was born and raised in Denver, so I came back to northern Colorado. And we have a governor who refuses to clean up the Capitol, which is in shambles. Every night it is disgraced and defaced. That rhymes. Wow. Every night, more and more and more, they rip down a statue of an abolitionist, as many people around the country have seen. None of it has been cleaned up. And yet yesterday, after much pressure, and because he was going to do it anyway, he made a statewide mask rule. You have to, according to him, put a mask on your face when you leave your house. If you run, if you jog, if you bike ride, or if you go into a store, you have to wear a mask. This is outrageous. And my point is, even though Jared Polis, governor, has millions of dollars and is not a stupid man, he did not do this by himself. These governors and these leftist mayors and these unelected bureaucrats didn't just suddenly coincidentally come up with all the same tactics and all the same force that they're imposing on us. And that's the other thing that you don't have to be a black helicopter person to recognize, is that they're all doing the same thing. They're just making minor changes around the edges. So in Colorado, restaurants can only be open at 50%, which is outrageous and unconstitutional. In Washington, where it's a leftist, even more leftist than Colorado is, you can only be open 15%.
Wow.
Do people think that a business can run on that? No, it's an attack on private business unless you're a big box store doing business and the bidding of the government. They've got thugs doing the bidding of the government. They have big box stores doing the bidding of the government. Remember when the left hated Walmart? Well, they don't hate Walmart anymore because Walmart is doing the government's dirty work. If this were biblical, and I think this is an attack on America of biblical proportions,
Yes.
we would most certainly be David and they would be Goliath. But Rob, I believe there is a way to address this and to fight back, and they've given us a blueprint. The blueprint is do exactly what they desperately don't want us to do, as long as it doesn't offend our conscience. Okay, just like Churchill said.
Mm-hmm.
Never, 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 never give up. But also something so stupid as a mask, they're desperate to get us all doing. And we haven't talked enough about why that is, because the psychology of it is collectivism. Everybody marching in lockstep. The real psychology of masks, and there's so much of it, is to erase individuality and replace it with obedience. That's really what it's about. And they are so committed to these masks, regardless of the facts, regardless of the issues. Don't get involved anymore in arguing the efficacy of masks, because it isn't about that. As I put in my meme yesterday, stop arguing whether masks are pro and con. Arguing and debate is the domain of free people. You can't debate something you're being forced to do. The issue is force, not the mask.
It is a brilliant analysis. And Karen Kataline, if people want to follow your work, read this piece, or follow you in other arenas, tell us where we can reach you.
Well, you can find more about me than you ever want to know at KarenKataline.com. And yes, my first name is a punchline. We can talk about that another time. Karen, K-A-R-E-N, Kataline, K-A-T-A-L-I-N-E. I do my own show called Spouting Off every Friday at 2 p.m. So people can call in. My piece that you mentioned, that you referenced, was just picked up by Western Journal. They changed the title, but it's the same piece, or they can read it at my website, KarenKataline.com.
Karen Kataline, thank you so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast, and always good to talk with you. That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at schillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time,